Kale Mars stood at the edge of the white marble dais, his heart thundering in his chest. Ahead of him, the crowd of diplomats and dignitaries from half a dozen worlds waited in polite silence. At their center stood Urshina, of the Virali, his bride, but she looked no more eager than a stone statue. Her skin was pale beneath the soft glow of the chandeliers, and her dark hair fell straight and heavy around her shoulders. When she lifted her eyes, they met his for a single breath, then slid away. Kale swallowed the knot in his throat and forced himself to smile. He had prepared for every moment of this ceremony down to the last syllable of the translation protocol. But he had not prepared for the hollow ache that filled his chest when he saw her unmoving body beside him. He tried to recall every lesson in Varela culture, where logic and order ruled above all else. He reminded himself that strong emotion might seem reckless to her people and that she might view his warmth as weakness, yet he could not quell the wish for a kind word, a touch of softness across her hand. When the officiant intoned the final passage in the common tongue, Kale felt the gaze of every ambassador upon him. Their eyes flicked between his face and Urshina's silent posture. He murmured the closing phrase, slipped a simple ring onto her finger, and they were officially bound. A polite applause rippled through the hall, and Kale bowed his head. In thanks, Urshina inclined her own in return, but her bow was precise and brief. She never once smiled. After the formalities, the guests drifted away toward the grand banquet hall. Kale offered his arm to Urshina, but she declined with a neutral nod. He led her instead behind the dais and through a pair of tall doors that opened onto the boarding corridor of the Starliner U.S. Meridian. The corridor's lights shone like pale sunbeams along gleaming panels of metal. Guests bustled past them, congratulating Kale and whispering polite questions. Urshina trailed behind, her hands folded before her. Once they reached their private cabin, Urshina paused at the threshold. The room was small but warm, with a window that looked out onto the dark sea of space. Kale turned toward her, holding his breath. "Would you like music?" he asked softly. "A recording of a human lullaby." She only nodded. Kale moved to a small console and played the gentle melody. The notes drifted through the cabin like a soft breeze. He watched her shoulders relax by a fraction, but she did not smile. Kale looked around and saw two identical cases of dark alloy locked at the foot of her bed. He guessed they held her personal effects. He wondered if they contained messages or images from her homeworld. He knew protocol forbade any civilian from opening another's luggage. But a thought struck him. Perhaps the weight she carried in those cases matched the weight he felt in his own heart. He closed the music deck and turned to her. "I hope you like it," he said, voice gentle. "If there is anything else you wish to hear, tell me." Urshina's lips parted as if to speak, but then she shook her head and stepped toward the window. Outside, the stars glimmered like distant beacons of hope. Kale moved beside her and placed a hand lightly on her elbow. She did not pull away. They stood in silence, two hearts beating against a void of questions. Kale felt a surge of hope. Maybe her coldness was a shield, not a wall. Maybe she feared something in her own past, fear he could ease with patience and kindness. He thought of his family back on Earth, how his mother collected wildflowers, pressing them between vellum pages so she could share their beauty. He swore to himself he would do the same for Urshina. Late that night, when the Starliner's hum was the only sound, Kale lay awake in his berth, staring at the closed doors of their cabin. He pictured her silent profile, the way her eyes had drifted past his every greeting. He imagined the secrets locked in her luggage. He imagined reaching inside and finding a heart that trembled with loss. And he imagined being the one to warm it. In the soft glow of the corridor lamps, Kale rose and stepped toward Urshina's door. "Ah." He paused, hand on the panel, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would begin again. Gifts, stories, small kindnesses. Till she spoke more than a word or two. Until she showed him the truth she carried in that heavy alloy case. He let out a breath he did not know he held, and with steady fingers, he pressed the release latch. Kale woke the next morning to the soft hum of the Starliner. He dressed quickly and knocked on Urshina's door. When she opened it, her face was still pale and quiet, but her shoulders did not tense. He offered her a freshly pressed earth flower between vellum pages. "I found this growing near the council gardens," he said gently. "I thought you might like its color." Nashina took the vellum and examined the small blue petals. She traced the veins with her fingertip and met his eyes for a moment before she turned away to study the flower more closely. He stepped into the cabin, saw her asleep beside the flower. Her breath was even and calm. Kale placed a soft cloak over her shoulders and whispered, "I want you to be comfortable." She stirred and nodded, but did not speak. He left the cabin, his heart both heavy and hopeful. The corridor he paused. At a viewport, watching distant stars drift like diamonds, he reminded himself that patience and kindness could melt even the coldest barrier. At breakfast in the communal dining hall, Kale chose Urshina's favorite fruit from her home world, sweet silken palm berries, and placed them on her tray. He sat beside her and offered her a warm smile. "My mother taught me to try new foods," he said softly. She accepted one berry and bit into its juicy flesh. Her eyes widened in surprise at the burst of sweetness. For the first time, she allowed a hint of a reaction, a quiet nod of approval. After breakfast, Kale escorted her to the ship's holographic library. The shelves glowed with titles in every language. He selected a simple human fable about a small bird that saved its flock by singing through a storm. As he played the story, he saw Urshina's eyes soften. When the bird's song calmed the raging wind, she placed her hand on his arm and whispered, "Tell me another." His chest swelled with joy. Her voice was soft but real. That afternoon, Kale invited Ursina to walk with him through the Starliner's botanical corridor. Here, alien vines coiled around glowing pillars, and flowers bloomed in gentle rainbow hues. She paused beside a cluster of violet buds. Kale knelt and pointed to a brittle earth flower he had brought. "On my planet," he said, "people press these flowers to hold a memory." He opened his pocket and revealed a vellum of wild daisies from his childhood home. Urshina's lips curved for the first time into something like a smile as she stroked the small white petals. Later, he guided her to the ship's observation deck. They stood before a giant window that framed the swirling gas clouds of a distant nebula. Kale activated a recording of Earth's children playing in a meadow. Their laughter echoed softly in the cabin. Urshina closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. When the laughter faded, she opened her eyes and looked at him. Her voice trembled. "It's laughter, it is warm." Kale reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. That evening, Kale prepared a simple meal of roasted root tubers and spiced tea. He invited Urshina to taste the tea's warm aroma. She inhaled deeply and said, "It reminds me of home when I sat with my father watching suns set." Her words carried a weight of longing. Kale poured 2 cups and sat beside her, offering comfort. As they drank, he told her stories of Earth's sunsets, how colors spilled across the sky, and how people gathered to watch them fade. When night fell, Kale found Urshina in the corridor, standing in soft shadow. He handed her a small holly mitter, loaded with recordings of Earth's rain, birds singing at dawn, and human laughter. She accepted it with shaking fingers. "Thank you," she said quietly. Tears glimmered in her eyes. Kale wrapped an arm around her shoulders and guided her back to her cabin. Inside, Urshina placed the emitter on her pillow and pressed the play button. As the sounds filled the room, she leaned against Kale, her cold armor finally cracking. He held her close, feeling her tremble as memories and hope mingled. In that moment, Kale knew that the truth he discovered in her luggage was only the beginning. Her heart was thawing, and their journey together had truly begun. Kale woke before dawn, his mind still full of the warmth he had seen in Urshina's eyes the night before. He dressed slowly, careful not to wake her. As he stepped into the corridor, the ship's soft lights guided him back to her cabin. There, at the foot of her bed, stood the 2 dark alloy cases. Even in the dim glow, their lock seams called to him, whispering of secrets he longed to understand all day. Kale tried to focus on his duties. He greeted other passengers in the lounge, joined the morning briefing, and even practiced a few phrases in Varela with the ship's translator. Yet every few minutes, his thoughts drifted back to those cases. He respected her privacy, Varela, custom-prized personal boundaries, but he worried that her silence still held pain. He remembered how she had trembled when she first heard human laughter. Something in those cases must explain her sorrow. After the midday meal, Kale walked with Urshina through the hollow garden. He pointed out a bloom of iridescent petals and told her it reminded him of hope. She smiled softly, but only for a moment. When she turned, Kale noticed how her gaze kept drifting back to the cases when they passed the cabin door. The sight made Amakshi wanted to tell him something, but fear held her back. He knew he had to learn the truth. That night, while the ship hummed through deep space, Kale crept quietly back to her cabin. He carried a small kit of diplomatic tools, fine picks and a microlens used for inspecting engine components. He paused at her door, heart pounding, and rubbed his palms together. He whispered an apology to the night air, vowing he would only look once and return everything just as it was. With a soft click, he disengaged the lock on the first case. The lid hissed open like a distant sigh. Inside lay neat rows of translucent data crystals, each glowing faintly with its own inner light. Beside them rested a holometer, its surface engraved with Virali's script. Kale drew in a breath. The crystals looked like frozen raindrops caught in glass, so precious. He lifted one gently, feeling its cool weight in his palm, and studied the tiny glyphs etched along its edge. He set the crystal on the small table beside the bed and opened the second case. More crystals lay inside, along with a folded piece of fabric the color of moonlight. He touched the cloth and felt the fine threads beneath his fingers. It must be part of her world, a symbol of home or a piece of a ceremonial robe. His chest tightened. Each item in those cases was a fragment of her life, held private until now, and he felt honored and terrified to hold them. Kale considered stopping there, returning everything unseen. Yet curiosity burned too bright, picked up the holometer, and pressed its activation button. A soft blue beam sprang to life, revealing a small display. On it, words appeared in Varela, "To the one who frees me." His breath caught. He tapped the glyph that looked most like a human word for view, and the beam shifted into a tiny window. Across the window came the faint image of a child's face pale. Eyes wide with wonder, soft voice spoke in broken common. "Remember when the sky was full of life?" Kale's eyes widened as the image flickered, showing a ruined city under dying suns. He watched as the child traced cracks in the ground. The child's lips parted, and he heard her voice whisper, "I lost everything." In that moment, Kale felt her pain as if it were his own. Quickly, Kale shut off the emitter and closed the cases with trembling hands. He replaced them exactly lock-sealed, seams unbroken. I stepped back into the corridor, his heart heavy. But resolute, he now held her past in his mind, fragments of loss, fear, and desperate hope. He understood why she had stayed silent, and he vowed to honor her story with his own kindness. Tomorrow, he would share his discovery with her, and together they would turn her sorrow into new strength. Kale rose before the ship's alarms and dressed in the soft glow of the corridor lights. Carried 2 cups of lightly sweetened tea and a tray of fresh fruit, silken palm berries and crisp earth apples. When he reached Ursina's cabin, he paused, took a steady breath, and knocked. Her door opened almost silently. She wore a simple tunic, and her eyes were wide but calm. Kale offered her a cup and a kind smile. "May I join you?" he asked softly. She nodded and stepped aside. They sat at the small table by the window, where the stars trailed past like distant lanterns. Kale poured hot tea into their cups. Steam curled upward in gentle spirals. He set the tray down and looked at Urshina's face. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Kale took a breath. "Last night," he began in careful virili, "I opened your cases. I am sorry I broke protocol. I did it because I wanted to understand your silence." He paused, letting his words hang between them. Urshina's fingers tightened around her cup. Her pale lips trembled as she replied in her own tongue, "I felt ... afraid." Her voice was soft, hesitant. "My people valued logic. I could not show grief. I thought my sorrow would shame you." She closed her eyes, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. Cale reached across the table and gently wiped it away. "Your grief is not a weakness," he said. "It is part of your strength." She lifted her eyes and met his. "On Varelia Prime," she said, "the sons died one by one. I watched rivers dry and children cry. I carried these memories in my luggage, hoping I could learn from humans how to carry loss without breaking." Her voice caught. "I volunteered for this marriage to see if hope still lived beyond my grief." Cale felt his heart ache at her words. He set his cup down and shared his own story. "On Earth," he said, "we have storms that tear down homes and wars that break families. Yet we rebuild, plant gardens in the ashes, sing songs in the ruins, and we tell stories so that our children know we survived." He described his hometown, where neighbors worked together after floods, sharing meals and laughter. "Hope," he said, "is what we choose to carry." Urshina listened, her gaze softening. She placed her hand over his. Her touch was cool, but grounded. "Tell me more of your Earth," she whispered. Cale smiled and told her of sunrise over blue oceans and fields of wildflowers that danced in the wind. He spoke of children's laughter echoing through crowded streets and the warmth of a shared meal among friends. With each story, Ursina's eyes grew brighter. When he finished, Ursina leaned forward. "Thank you," she said in a voice steady with new resolve. "You have shown me that feeling is not chaos, but connection." She reached inside her tunic and pulled out a small data crystal from her case one she had held back. Light pulsed within it, faint and hopeful. "This is the last memory I will carry alone," she said. "From now on, I share it with you." Cale's chest filled with warmth. He rose and offered his arm. "Shall we make new memories together?" He asked Urshina, took his arm, and they stepped out into the corridor. The ship's gentle hum was their only witness as they walked hand in hand toward the botanical garden. Inside the garden dome, the alien vines curled around glowing pillars and blossoms drifted like lanterns in still air. Under a soft haze of light, Cale and Urshina paused by a fountain that shimmered with holographic fish. Urshina smiled a genuine, tender smile that lit her pale features. Cale squeezed her hand and led her deeper into the blooms. Together they chose a violet blossom and pressed it between vellum pages, sealing their first shared memory. In that quiet moment among alien petals and distant stars, two hearts once cold and silent began to beat together in hope. Cale woke before dawn, but stayed quiet so Urshina could rest. He dressed in his uniform and took a deep breath. Today, they would visit the Starliner's Cultural Hall. He carried a small packet wrapped in soft cloth. Inside was the violet they had pressed together. He placed it on her pillow with a gentle note, "For our first morning as partners." When Urshina opened her eyes, she saw the flower and the note. A gentle smile curved on her lips. She held the violet close and whispered, "Thank you, Cale." He bowed his head, happy to see her warmth. Together they walked to the cultural hall, hand in hand. The corridor lights glowed like morning sun. Inside the hall, tables stood beneath hanging sculptures of stars and planets. Cale led Urshina to a display of human dance. Holograms showed people moving to simple rhythms, turning beneath soft lantern light. "On Earth," he said, "we often share joy by dancing." Urshina watched, her eyes bright with curiosity. He offered his hand. "Shall we try?" She nodded, and he guided her through the steps. Her movements were stiff at first, but Cale moved slowly, matching her pace. With each step, her shoulders relaxed. When they spun beneath the lantern glow, Urshina laughed a clear, bright sound that echoed around the hall. Cale's heart lifted. He realized that joy could be taught as easily as grief. After their dance, they visited a display of human art. Paintings of green fields and blue oceans lined the walls. Urshina reached out to touch a brushstroke on a canvas. "This place is full of life," she said softly. "It reminds me that even after loss, beauty can grow." Cale smiled and pointed to a small painting of wildflowers. "My mother painted that. She said flowers help us remember hope. It's afternoon light." Fell through the hollow window. Cale and Urshina sat at a low table and shared tea and small pastries. He taught her how to hold the cup, how to sip, and close her eyes to taste the aroma. She returned the lesson by showing him how to pour tea like a Virali host, slow and precise. They laughed when a drop spilled, and Kale gently wiped it from her tunic. Later, they stood before the cases at her cabin door. Kale touched the latch and looked at Urshina. "Shall we add one more memory?" he asked. She took his hand and opened the case herself. Inside lay the holly mitre and crystal. She pressed a button, and soft light filled the room. This time, it showed a field of violet blossoms beneath twin suns. Urshina's voice spoke in clear common. "This is the festival of new beginnings." Tears shone in her eyes. Kale stepped close and wrapped an arm around her. "Want to share all my memories with you," he said. She leaned into him and whispered, "And I want to share mine." In that moment, two worlds stood together, hers of loss and logic, his of hope and emotion. They closed the case and locked it, sealing their trust. As the UES Meridian neared the human Vireli council chambers, Kale and Urshina stood at the viewport side by side. The stars ahead glowed like distant candles guiding their way. Together, they watched the lights of a new world appear on the horizon. In their joined hands, they carried both grief and joy and the promise of a future. They would build together. Kale woke early to the soft vibration of the Starliner's docking thrusters. Through the cabin window, gentle lights of the council station shone like distant stars. He dressed in his formal uniform, its blue sash, bright against white fabric, and checked the holly mitre in his pocket. Today would shape the future of two worlds. He paused by Urshina's door and took a steady breath before knocking. Urshina opened the door wearing her ceremonial robes. The pale fabric caught the light, and a simple brooch of violet petals lay at her throat. Her eyes, once cold, now held a quiet confidence. Kale offered her a small mirror so she could adjust her hair. She accepted it with a gentle nod, and when she looked at him, her lips curved in a calm smile. He felt a surge of pride. They met in the corridor for a simple breakfast of spiced tea and warm rolls. Kale poured tea into 2 fine cups and handed one to Urshina. Steam rose in gentle spirals, filling the cramped space with warmth. She sipped slowly, savoring the taste. "This is good," she said softly. "It reminds me of morning light." Kale smiled and replied, "May it guide us today." Their hands brushed briefly, no longer hesitant, but steady and sure. The corridor lights dimmed as the ship docked against the council station. A low hum echoed through the metal halls. Crew members hurried past them, carrying equipment and sealing bulkheads. Kale held Urshina's hand and led her toward the airlock. Each step brought them closer to their new world. Urshina paused before the docking bay window and watched the vast council station unfold. She drew in a breath and said, "It is larger than I imagined." Kale squeezed her hand. "Together, we will bring light into its halls." As they exited into the docking bay, an alarm sounded. Red lights flashed across the walls. Crew chief shouted, "Docking clamp pressure is falling. We risk a hull breach." The crowd of delegates froze. Pipes hissed as emergency seals tried to engage. Kale's training kicked in. He moved faster than he ever had, checking the readouts on a nearby console. Urshina followed, stepping up beside him. Carcom presence steadied the panicked crew. Kale called out to the engineer, "Bring replacement gaskets here."
Yes.
Voice was firm but kind. Urshina spoke in clipped Vireli, translating for a crew member who only knew her native tongue. Then she turned to the anxious staff and spoke in common. "We can fix this. Trust each other and stay steady." Her words were precise, yet full of warmth. The crew rallied, passing tools and tubing. Together, they worked Kale, guiding Urshina, soothing fears, and the crew moving in unison. Within minutes, the emergency seals closed and pressure stabilized. The red lights faded, replaced by steady green. A cheer rose from the crew. Kale exhaled and gave Urshina a grateful look. She smiled, her pale face glowing with relief. A crew member bowed and said, "Thank you, honored guests, you saved us." Urshina placed a hand over her heart and replied, "We share this safety together." Her clear voice carried through the bay. Kale felt the warmth spread through him. With the crisis behind them, Urshina and Kale walked through the docking tunnel toward the council chambers. Delegates from many worlds lined the walls, nodding in respect. Urshina stepped forward and waved, her confidence radiant. Kale walked by her side, proud of the brave woman she had become. He thought back to the silent bride he had married now, transformed into a leader who could calm storms and bring hope. At the council hall entrance, two vast doors loomed before them. Golden symbols of peace and unity glowed on their surface. Urshina straightened her shoulders and looked at Kale. "Are you ready?" she asked in a soft tone. Kale smiled and brought her hand to his lips. "With you, always." Arm in arm, they stepped forward together. Behind those doors lay the final test and the promise of a new era for both their peoples. Kale and Urshina stood before the great doors of the council hall. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a vast chamber lit by pale blue crystal lanterns. Rows of delegates from human worlds and Verili worlds filled the space. Their eyes turned to the cold bride and her husband. Kale felt his chest swell with pride as he saw Urshina straighten her shoulders and step forward with calm grace. As they reached the raised dais, a hush fell over the crowd. Kale took Urshina's hand, and she nodded gently, stepped back, letting her stand alone beneath the lantern glow. Her pale robes caught the light, and the violet brooch at her throat glimmered like a star. For a heartbeat she was silent. Then she lifted her head and spoke in clear, common English. "My people once watched our sons fade," Urshina began, her voice steady but soft. "We learned to carry sorrow in silence, believing that feeling left us weak. But I have walked among humans, people who feel deeply, who share joy and grief alike. They taught me that emotion is not chaos, but connection. It is the bond that ties us together, stronger than any law or treaty." Her words echoed through the chamber. Kale watched as Verili delegates exchanged startled glances. Some leaned forward, curiosity lighting their eyes. Urshina continued, "Today, I stand before you with a heart renewed by kindness. I bring the memory of my lost world, not as a burden, but as a promise. A promise that we will build together, learn together, and heal together." She paused, letting her message sink in. Then she spoke of hope. "Let this union, one forged in truth and warmth, be the first step toward a new era, where human courage meets Verili wisdom, where laughter rings in council halls, and tears are met with comfort, not shame. Let us join our hands, our hearts, and our futures." A murmur ran through the crowd as delegates rose to their feet. First came the human envoys, clapping softly. Then the Verili representatives followed, their applause precise but genuine. Beside Urshina, beaming at her courage, he squeezed her hand, and she gave his fingers a gentle curl in return. The High Chancellor of the Verili rose next. He approached the dais with careful steps. "Your Grace," he said, bowing low to Urshina, "you have shown us a path we did not see. You have honored both your peoples with your honesty and warmth." He turned to Kale. "And you, Ambassador, have proven that compassion can bridge any void." Together, they affixed their quills to the treaty scroll. With each signature, the seal glowed brighter. Human and Verili symbols intertwined, and the ancient treaty chest at the dais hummed as lights pulsed along its runes. When the final mark was made, a soft chime rang out, and the crowd erupted in unified applause. Afterward, the chamber's doors opened to a grand celebration. Delegates mingled beneath crystal lanterns and floral banners. Kale and Urshina walked among them, greeting friends old and new. People offered gifts of woven fabrics, pressed flowers, and fragrant spices. Laughter and conversation filled the air. Where once Urshina's silence had weighed heavy, now her voice rang clear with warmth. Later, as the celebration quieted, Kale led Urshina to a balcony overlooking the starfield. The station lights glimmered below, and distant ships drifted. Through the void, like fireflies, he wrapped his arm around her waist and drew her close. "You were brave today," he whispered. "You changed two worlds with your words." Urshina rested her head on his shoulder and smiled, a tender, genuine curve of her pale lips. "I was never brave alone," she replied softly. "Your kindness gave me courage." Together they watched the stars, two hearts once separated, by fear now beating in steady harmony. In that quiet moment, Kale and Urshina knew their bond was more than marriage. It was a living bridge between worlds. And as they looked out at the endless sky, they saw not emptiness, but the promise of all that lay ahead, shared memories, shared dreams, and a future built on warmth and understanding.